It was just another day at a bustling gas station, cars pulling in, people grabbing snacks, the usual hustle and bustle. But for one black man filling up his tank, it turned into something far from ordinary. Two white officers approached him with a smirk, turning what should have been a quick stop into an unnecessary search. They joked, chuckled, and treated the whole thing like some kind of game, assuming he was just another face in the crowd. What they didn't realize was this wasn't just any man. They were unknowingly searching the asterisk new boss asterisk. The man stood calm, watching their every move, as the officers remained blissfully unaware of the shocking twist about to shake their world. What happens when the truth comes out? Stick around, because this story is one you won't believe, and it might just change the way you think about accountability and power. The man stayed composed as the officers continued their so-called routine search, cracking jokes like it was all harmless fun. But beneath his calm demeanor, his sharp eyes didn't miss a single detail: their tone, their assumptions, the lack of professionalism. He had seen this type of behavior before, though never directed at him in quite this way. What the officers didn't realize was that this man wasn't just dressed in casual clothes. He was taking a low-key break after a long day at his new position as the chief of police. It was his first week on the job, and he had been observing his department carefully, wanting to understand the team he would lead. He'd already read about their record, their history, and even the complaints filed against some officers, but nothing could have prepared him for this first-hand encounter. As their laughter echoed, he quietly wondered how far they'd take it before the truth came out. As the officers continued their search, the man stayed quiet, letting them dig themselves deeper. One officer picked through his belongings with unnecessary flair, holding up items as if they were trophies. The other kept asking vague, leading questions, hoping to trip him up. Their confidence grew with each passing moment, convinced they were in control. Meanwhile, the man's thoughts raced. He didn't just see this as a personal slight. This was a glimpse into a larger issue he'd vowed to address as chief. Around them, other customers at the gas station had started to notice the scene. A few people exchanged uneasy glances, while others pulled out their phones, recording from a distance. The officers, however, were too caught up in their performance to care. This wasn't just a search, it was a display of power. What they didn't realize was how drastically the power dynamic was about to shift. The man took a slow breath, deciding his next move. The man stood still, letting the officers finish their search. One of them smirked as he held up the man's wallet, flipping it open without asking. "Let's see what we've got here," he said with a chuckle, clearly enjoying the moment. But as his eyes landed on the badge tucked inside, his expression froze. His partner, noticing the sudden shift, leaned over to take a look. Their smug confidence evaporated in an instant. The man didn't say a word, letting the weight of their discovery settle in. The officers exchanged nervous glances, stumbling over their words as they tried to explain themselves. "We didn't mean anything by it," one of them mumbled, his tone now dripping with panic instead of arrogance. The tension was thick, the kind that makes time feel like it's standing still. Around them, the crowd grew quieter, phones still recording, waiting to see what would happen next. The man finally broke his silence, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "So," he said, locking eyes with the officers, "this is how you handle routine stops." His words were measured, but the authority in his tone was unmistakable. The officers stammered, fumbling for excuses, their earlier bravado nowhere to be found. But before they could say much, the situation took another unexpected turn. A senior officer, responding to reports of a disturbance at the gas station, arrived on the scene. Stepping out of his patrol car, he froze when he saw who was standing there. "Chief," he said, his face pale with recognition. The officers immediately realized their mistake was even worse than they thought. But instead of relief, the man's expression grew more serious. He turned to the senior officer and asked, "Is this the culture here?" Jokes, assumptions, and public humiliation. The tension in the air grew heavier, leaving everyone wondering how much further this reckoning would go. The officers stood frozen, their confidence shattered as the weight of their actions became clear. The man, now fully commanding the moment, turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "What you've all witnessed today is exactly why I'm here," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "This department needs change, and it starts now." The senior officer shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was coming next. "Chief," he began cautiously, "I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding." But the man cut him off, raising a hand. "No excuses," he said firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's had to deal with this kind of behavior." He looked back at the two officers, their faces now flushed with shame. "You will both be held accountable, and so will anyone else in this department who thinks this is acceptable." Just as the officers thought the moment couldn't get any worse, the man dropped the final twist. "This isn't over," he said, pulling out his phone, "because I've been recording this entire encounter too, and I'll be sharing it with the department and the community." The crowd murmured in surprise, their phones still recording as the man walked away, leaving the officers to face not just their mistakes, but the reality of a new era in leadership. The gas station grew quiet as the man walked away, his words lingering in the air. The crowd slowly dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in quiet approval. The officers, still stunned, were left to process the reality of what had just happened. They hadn't just embarrassed themselves, they had exposed a much deeper problem within their department. Back at the precinct, the video recorded by the chief sparked immediate action. It wasn't about punishing individuals, it was about setting a new standard. The chief implemented mandatory training sessions, community meetings, and an open-door policy to rebuild trust. Word of the incident spread, and while it wasn't the start he had envisioned, it became the catalyst for meaningful change. As the chief reflected later that evening, he knew this was just the beginning. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time it felt within reach.